Restricting the ability of its citizens to carry weapons is a staple of many countries' lawmaking process. The idea behind it is to reduce the amount of lethality that the average person gets to wield if they one day decide to hurt others. Regardless of whether these laws actually prevent criminals from getting their hands on said weapons is a different story. What remains unquestionable is the fact that a human has a much lesser power of destruction with their bare hands than with a knife or a gun. Martial arts seek to bypass that legislation by increasing the body's ability to serve as its own sword and shield. This is to the point that some practitioners need to register their limbs as lethal weapons once they reach a certain level of mastery in their heart. Shonen manga pushes that concept even further, with most of the characters of its stories gaining the ability to defeat armed opponents with their bare fists. It isn't rare for one human to be able to defeat hundreds of assailants in a fight, when they're not just destroying entire mountains with a simple attack. Some more specialized lines of publication, like martial arts mangas, develop that idea by asking the following question. Is it possible for a human to not simply be strong enough to surpass weapons, but to become a weapon? I'm not talking about becoming more lethal than your average blunt object, since that's something that any C character in any given shonen eventually accomplishes. Rather, the goal is to turn your body into a living armada. We've already seen that with Jack Hanma and his bites, or Orochi Doppo and his penetrating strikes. But Grappler Baki is not the only series to deal with that topic. Rihito appears very early on in Kengan Ashura, serving as a foe for Oma. At first glance, he doesn't appear to be anything special. Oafish in looks and behavior, he fits the bill for the typical cannon fodder character that will get obliterated by the protagonist, and only serves as a stepping stone for his progression. Blessed with a massive build and a facility for packing on muscles, his fighting style is focused a lot on brute strength. Because of his natural power, this is enough to overwhelm most fighters who lack the ability to see blows coming, and end up dragged into a brawling match that they are sure to lose. Aided by a thick skull that allows him to absorb a lot of punishment, he's destined to become a punching bag for the faster and more skilled fighters that populate the Kengan Ashura manga, a fate exemplified by his first exchange of blows with Oma. He represents the trope of the average martial arts series brute that the mangaka utilizes to introduce the theme of skill versus strength, so crucial for the genre. However, unlike most of the brawn with no brains crowd, he's not to be discarded so easily. You see, Rihito's got a very special trick up his sleeve, a trick that earned him the nickname The Reaper, and one that makes its owner think of himself as superhuman. This special technique isn't revolutionary or novel. Actually, it seems to draw direct inspiration from two Grappler Baki characters, Anayama Kaoru and Shinogi Kosho, Kureha's younger brother. He is indeed able, with a single sweep of the arm, to shave the flesh of his opponents and open deep wounds on their bodies. This ability isn't something he worked for, Rihito was born with it. Similarly to Anayama, he was bestowed with a superhuman grip at birth, his specializing more on pinch grip and finger strength. This is in direct opposition with someone like Kosho from Grappler Baki, who had to work hard to develop the strength of his fingers. Enduring a painful training regimen for years what was it took for him to turn his hands into blades, whereas Rihito got to his level of fighting power putting in absolutely zero efforts. Their styles also differ in that Kosho is infinitely quicker and more technical, having received standard karate training before specializing in finger strength. Rihito, on the other hand, is a pure brawler who learned his craft on the streets, utilizing his innate talent to humiliate his opponents, which is the reason for his inflated ego. Those differences are exemplified by their respective build, with the brutish Rihito being 6 feet 2 and weighing 225 pounds, while the technician Kosho tops at 5 feet 8 and 180 pounds, showcasing a more refined and streamlined physique. Those specs also influence the way they utilize their sharp hands, as Rihito tends to swing his arms widely in order to claw at his opponents, in an indiscriminate fashion. This is the big strength of the razor edge technique. He doesn't really have to aim. As long as his fingers connect, the wound that will result from it will inevitably lead to blood loss. In a sense, each one of his blows can potentially be fatal. On top of that, he possesses impeccable defense. Think of him as an armored beast. If you attack him, there's no telling that he'll be the one to be worse off from the exchange. Even if the blow hurts, he'll be able to shake it off. However, there is a strong probability that the limb used to strike him will be maimed beyond the point of no return, which also explains why he often attacks so recklessly. Offense is his best defense. Kosho's approach is more circumspect and methodical. He prefers to dissect his enemies by slowly picking at their nerves and vital blood vessels, leaving them completely helpless to protect their bodies from the fury of blows that follows. Unlike Rihito, he doesn't really use his cold-cutting technique to finish off his opponents, as this often leaves him open to receiving a counter-attack. In a sense, even though he lacks the Reaper's raw talent, it is undeniable that his utilization of the slashing techniques is much more advanced. His application of the cold-cutting method is extremely precise and chirurgical, and he resorts to the wild tiger claw flaying only when he loses his temper, which is a sign that this isn't his preferred method of choice to defeat someone, and for good reasons. The issue with simply using your hands to hack away at the opponent is that this movement pattern is very similar to throwing haymakers. They cause a lot of damage when they land, but they're also telegraphed blows that are really easy to predict. Rihito and Kosho are sheltered from that reality because of the deadly nature of their strikes. Unlike a wind-up punch that would knock you out if it landed, their moves have the power to end lives altogether. That thought alone is enough to disturb any average human's sense of judgment and make them hesitate when it comes to dodging and delivering a counter blow. This is why someone like Rihito and Kengan Ashura never thought beyond the scope of his natural talent. It was more than enough to dispatch regular fighters. However, when you're facing fighting geniuses the likes of Tokita Oma and Baki Hanma, you've got to do better than that. Rihito learns this at his expense when Oma perfectly deciphers his Razor's edge and neutralizes it by closing the distance with him. At this point, resorting to his superior physical strength to turn the fight into a wrestling match and close the deal, he falls victim to his own hubris and discovers the frightening nature of true martial arts. For Kosho, who doesn't possess this natural-born power, the issue lays elsewhere. His cold-cutting techniques, while still incredibly lethal, fast and precise, remain fairly predictable. He can use his four limbs as blades, but only his fingers have the ability to detect and pull on nerves and arteries. Therefore, any direct blow his opponents need to look out for will come from his arms, making him an overall predictable fighter. To modify his combat pattern, which mostly consists of cold-cutting techniques and strikes or claws, Kosho will spend even more time developing his slashing techniques to widen his arsenal of strikes. As for Rihito, who didn't really apply any modification to his style after his defeat against Oma, the realization that he cannot rely solely on his talent and strength, but needs to develop his technique, will come from his humiliation at the end of Kuroki Genzai. In both cases, these are characters with an incredibly high potential for lethality, both with different approaches to the archetypal trope of the slasher, with an infinite amount of gimmicks at their disposal. It's always interesting to see martial arts mangakas revisiting similar ideas and coloring them with their own personal touch. And while Kengan Ashura is really a spin-off of sorts of Grappler Baki, which I want to discuss in a different video, it still retains its uniqueness and own personality, and is a must-read for any fan of the genre. This was the first video on this series, but certainly not the last, and I hope to see you soon for another episode of Muscle Manga.